In Module 5, we're going to talk about rendering and routing. Now, they're slightly different, but they're obviously interconnected. First of all, let's talk about rendering. By default, when you build an Astro site, it builds in SSG mode or static mode. In other words, it pre-builds every single route on your site. Anything in the pages directory that's a valid page will pre-render to HTML. When somebody goes to your server to hit a certain route, like the about route, it will grab that HTML page and the server will just return it to you. So it's really fast by default, but obviously not very interactive. Now you can, of course, include client-side JavaScript. This includes both just like straight-up client-side JavaScript, but also something Astro calls Astro Islands, where you hydrate something with JavaScript after page load. We're going to talk about that later. For now, either way, just note that if you're in SSG mode, which is the default mode, it's going to send you a pre-rendered HTML page, which you can then interact with just client-side JavaScript. Now there is another option, and that's called SSR mode, or server-side rendered mode. Now this is not the default in Astro, but it is one of the ways you get a lot of power out of Astro. Now you do need to have an adapter, and there are a bunch available, some of those for providers like Netlify and Vercel, but you can also just use something like the Node adapter. The difference here is that when somebody requests a page, let's say they go to the About page again, instead of getting a pre-rendered HTML page, it actually renders it live on the server, creates the HTML page, and then returns it to them. Now, there are some real advantages of this. Number one, you can have dynamic content. So when somebody comes to a particular page, they're not getting something that's pre-rendered, they're getting something you're rendering at that time. Now, it's also a lot faster than another option that Astro doesn't really do, and that's called client-side rendering. Now, you can, of course, do client-side rendering kind of inside of an Astro Island. We'll talk about that later if you know about that. But basically, this is what stuff like React does. Or instead of going to the server and getting the stuff each time, getting like an HTML page, it will actually render all of that just using client-side JavaScript. So as you change routes or things like that, it will intercept all those requests and do all that client-side. Now, the difference is a server is a lot more powerful than somebody's local smartphone or computer, and so the speed can often suffer with client-side rendering. Usually you get a really slow first page load, and then after that it can be a little faster, but again, you're relying on that device. With server-side rendered mode, you get the dynamicness of the content, but you get the speed of the server. Now, SSR also enables really cool things like Astro Server Islands, actions, form handling on pages, dynamic API routes like post or put or delete, but you can also just have dynamic get routes. Again, we'll talk about a lot of that later. Essentially, right now what you need to know is that by default, Astro is going to use SSG mode to statically render all of your HTML ahead of time. You have another option, and that's called SSR, where you can dynamically render page routes as people come to them. Now, within SSR mode, there are actually a couple of options. The default is to enable SSR in every route, but not to actually activate it. For any particular page on your site, you can use a declaration called const pre-render. And if you set that equal to false, it will not pre-render the page and instead use your SSR adapter on that particular route. Now, this is route dependent, so each route can have this declaration up top. In other words, you get the benefit of SSG. It's even faster than SSR because everything will be pre-rendered, but on particular pages where you want there to be more dynamic content, you can disable pre-rendering. Once again, the only way to do this is with an SSR adapter already there. Now, you might say, hey, for my particular use case, I want every single page to be SSR by default. In that case, you can change a config option and set it the output to server. This will make every single thing on your site, every page on your site, automatically SSR rendered. Now you can go the opposite way, which is on any particular route, if the default is to render everything with SSR, you can set const pre-render equal to true, and it will actually pre-render that as HTML. Now, if this is a little confusing, let's actually look into some code. I've included the starter files below, so you'll want to download those. They're very similar to where we ended in the last module, but I have made some changes that you'll definitely want to grab. You can see here I've got this index route, and I went ahead and created a lot more posts and got rid of some of the extra stuff in our content config. So we only have posts and teams, no other stuff in here, and then I added some extra posts. So if I go inside data, I've got posts, I've got 9 of them, and then I've got 9 images, and I've added a couple of team members as well. I also changed from our generated slug ID, if you might remember we did that, to just use the more simpler slug here, and we can use that to actually define where these things are. Okay, so other than that, everything should be the same. If you have questions about that, let me know. Now, what I want to show you is what will happen when we build this site. Currently, the way we have our pages set up is we only have 2 routes. We have this index route, that's what you see right here. It's looping over all these and linking to individual posts. Then we also have post 1 right here. Now this is actually just hard-coded and we're getting a single post and then we're outputting it here. So this one should actually show me post 1, but basically everything else should not. And we can add extra stuff to this. We probably will as we go through this module. So what happens when I build this by default? Well, if I come over here and I say npm run build, it will use the build command to check everything and build it. Now notice it says it's generating static routes, post 1, and index. I can check that out if I go to the dist folder over here, and that's exactly what I have. I have an index.html file. This is what it will give to the server. Notice how it's embedded all the CSS I might need for this page as well. And then I've also got this post 1 that has its own index, which means it'll show at that route, post 1. And again, it's just all hard-coded. That's the default. That's what I would expect. Now, there is another option. Remember, that's server-side rendered mode. Now, in order to use this, we need to enable something called an adapter. Now, there are a lot of adapters available. I'm just going to use the node one right now. So I'll say npx astro add, and we'll add the node adapter. So I'll say yes to everything and then get this back up and running with npm run dev. Now in dev mode, this will look the exact same, right? So I can come over here. I got post 1, post 2, post 3. Notice that one thing to note about the way that content collections render, which I did not talk about in the last module, is that they're just like random. So it doesn't necessarily follow this schema. I'll have to actually sort off the post name, which we'll do as well as we move through this module. So that's why it's a little different, and it may be different for you from the start. Okay, but if I go to post 1, you'll see post 1 shows, but post 2 doesn't, etc., etc. Now, by default, remember, this simply enables SSR mode. No pages are actually rendered in SSR mode. So let's delete this just to make sure that we're getting the real truth. And I'll go ahead and say npm run build, and let's build the site and see what happens. Notice it's going to generate static routes because even though I have the ability to do server code, I haven't actually enabled it anywhere. So I've got client and server now, but notice everything is in the client, right? Same thing we'd expect. In the server, there's not really a whole lot. This is just essentially stuff that Node can use, but we haven't tapped into this at all. So what I want to do is actually enable this on a particular route. So what we'll do is we'll go over to maybe post 1 here, and at the top we're going to use that declaration. But the Astro extension actually gives you a helper if you forget what this is. So pre-render like this, and I'll just hit add, and it says export const pre-render, and I have to either do true or false. Now this can be a little bit of a mind warp, like am I pre-rendering it or not? The idea here is we do not want to pre-render this. We want to use SSR instead. So I'm going to set this to false. Now let's go ahead and build again. And notice as we build, it does generate static routes, but it also does some server stuff too. And notice what's missing in these static routes. No page 1. So if I come back over here and I look at the dist folder, now under client right here, I should see the index, but I don't see post 1. Instead, what I get down this way is a pages directory where post 1 is an MJS file. In other words, it's actually giving the server the code it needs to build this page live. Now when somebody goes to this page live, it will actually go ahead and fetch all this live. Now there's a helper we get in Astro. If I come over to my package.json here, it's this preview command. After you build, you can actually preview your code live. So let's come over here. We're going to do npm run preview. It should open up at the same port, but notice it's actually going to be live based on the code I had here, right? This code right here. So it's actually using the dist code instead of my src code. So it's saying this is what it will look like in production. So if I come over here, I can go to post 1. This is the page that will actually render live. So those are our two basic options. Now you might remember that with SSR enabled, if you want every page to be SSR by default, you can actually swap this. So I can come over to my Astro config over this way. I can add another config option. This would just be output. We're going to set this to server. Now server will pre-render everything by default. So if I go ahead and rebuild, notice we've got no static routes at all. Everything will be server-side rendered. So I should expect nothing really in here. And over here, all my pages are here. I've got the index and I've also got the post 1. Now, we now have the opposite option, right? Where I could come to post 1 and say, hey, for this particular page, I do want you to pre-render it because the blog post is not really going to change every time somebody comes to it. I don't need this to be dynamic. But maybe I have dynamic stuff on my homepage that I want to kind of be freshly fetched by the server each time. So I can come over here and now say npm run build, and you'll notice the exact opposite treatment we saw earlier, where now only post 1 is pre-rendered by default. Everything else is simply given code, that would just be the homepage at this point, to be rendered when needed. So those are the different basic rendering options we have available to us. Now there is a lot more you can do with rendering, client-side JavaScript, all kinds of stuff like that. but we'll look at all those things in a later module. This is the basics, and hopefully that gets you set to know how to actually render stuff on your site. In lesson 2, we want to start exploring routing. Now, we've looked already at rendering methods like SSG and SSR, and to just kind of keep stuff simple, I'm going to start with the starter code we had in the last lesson. So I've relinked that down below. You can go ahead and get rid of everything we did in the last lesson because we'll kind of slowly implement this in a real scenario in a second here. But for now, just note that we're using SSG mode. We don't have an SSR adapter, and it's kind of back where we started. Now, we did mention last time that you can see how these aren't sorted, like post 1, post 2, post 3, and that's because every time you restart your dev server, it'll just randomly grab those. It's non-deterministic, so it's not going to pick off the name and kind of route them a certain way. So if I come back over here, you'll see we've got data posts. We've got 9 of them, but we aren't like ordering these in any particular way. So why don't we start with that? If I come over to the index route, you'll notice here's all my posts. Before I map them, I can go ahead and sort them. Now, if I sort them directly off here, it'll actually modify the original array. That's just how this works. There's a new method called toSorted that kind of makes a copy. You can do that. Either one doesn't really matter. I'll just use the normal sort method for now. I'll grab A, I'll grab B, and I want the A.data.slug, and I want to local compare against B.data.slug. Now, once I do that, it's going to compare them all and sort them according to their name. Now, obviously, you probably do this according to like the publish date or something like that. In this case, just because we're naming them 1 through 9, I figured that would make sense as well. Okay, so now that we've got these things sorted properly, we're mapping through them. What we want to do is get rid of the hard coding. So here I've got post 1, that one works, but if I come to post 2, nothing works here. So what we need to do, because we're in SSG mode, again, we kind of went back to the default, is we need to find a way to statically render all the different pages that might come from this route. Now, obviously, I don't want to hard code post 1, post 2, and Astro gives us the ability to now do something different here. So what I'm going to do is actually create a subdirectory. I guess we could just call this posts, since that's what we're calling everything, and I'm going to drag this over here to the subdirectory. So we'll move it over here, and I might need to go up another level, like here. This is where something like the tsconfig option, where you can actually use aliases, is helpful, but for now, we'll just leave it where it is. Okay, so now that I've got this, I'm still rendering this properly. If I come into posts /post 1, so this one will no longer work, but if I come into posts like that, it should now work. What I want to do though is remove the hard-coded nature here, because that's the whole point, and we're going to change this, and we can add something in bracketed syntax that allows us to dynamically pass in a page param. So here, we'll just call this something like slug. Now you can name it whatever you want, but what you name it is important, because over here you have to actually reference it the right way. And notice it says get static paths function is required for dynamic routes. Now this is in static site generation mode, where we have to tell essentially Astro every single route or path we have ahead of time so it knows how to build it. And for that, we use a get static paths function. Now you don't have to be using content collections for this. You can do this with any kind of data, and we'll do this with just a JSON endpoint in a moment. For now, let's just come over here, and I'm going to comment all this out. And let's do the same down here, just so it doesn't get angry with us. And then I'm going to use another helper from the Astro extension, get static paths, and look at that, it just generates the function for me. It'll also make sure I've satisfied the get static paths type, so that'll be really helpful for us. Now, let me jump over to the docs, and it is important that you familiarize yourself with this. We've already looked at just like hard coding pages. We've done that. Here's where we're at right now, where we're going to get static paths and just return individual routes. So I can just return an array of objects that have to have a param thing, and then whatever I've named this right here, we named our slug, they named theirs dog, that's what I have to pass in down here in an object. So we can just grab all this, or maybe we should just do it inside of here. So let's come over here, and I could re-hard code everything, right? So I can have an array, and the first one is an object here, we'll say params, and it already knows I need that. And then I need to name it slug, and this will just be post 1. All right, let's just copy this down now a couple of times. So I'm going to add a comma over here like this, and let's get a couple more in here. So we'll have page 2 and page 3. So if I do that, and I should be able to come back over here, you'll notice I get post 1, and it is actually rendering a page at post 1. If I come over to page 2, same thing here. Page 3, that'll work. Page 4, what do you think is going to happen? 404, right? Because it knows these are not the actual stated paths that are supposed to be at this dynamic route. Now, this params right here is just saying whatever is in the bracketed syntax. So it knows already that I'm at /post / something else. The params will then simply be anything after the / posts. So you see how I have post 4 here. Post 4 doesn't exist as one of these options, so it knows to throw a 404 page. Now, this is only slightly better because we're still hard coding, right? It's not individual pages, but we're hard coding all of these static paths. So what I want to do is make it way more dynamic. Now, if I come down this way, you'll notice that you can actually do this for multiple different params in the same section. So that's something else to pay attention to. That's why it's an object where you have to pass in the name of each individual one. In our case, we only have one, which is slug. Now, we're going to look at localization and all that in a much later module where we'll do this kind of from scratch, but just a note here. How do we actually make this truly dynamic? Well, I don't have to hard code all this, right? I can use another helper, not get entry. I can use get collection and grab all of my posts ahead of time. And I already know what those posts are, right? So I can say posts equals, we'll just await get collection. I'll pull that in up top, and we need to pass it posts, and that should give me all of those posts. Asynchronous call, so let's come over here and make sure we add async. So it's going to asynchronously call, grab all of these, and then we can return off of this and actually pass in the individual posts. So let's not pass like a hard-coded array here. Let's map over all of our posts. So we're going to say posts.map. We'll grab each post, which you can call that whatever you want, but I'll just call it post. And for each of these, now we need to return something, right? So we could do this explicitly, where I come over here and say return, or we could do this implicitly and wrap it in parentheses. So that's what I'll do. So for each of these items, I want to return an object. The object has to have params, and this has to have slug, and this will come from the post.data.slug. Now those slugs are like post 1, post 2, post 3, and post 4, so this should work. If I come over here and refresh, post 4 works just fine. I should be able to go all the way up to post 9, but I don't have a post 10, which means if I go to post 10, it should fail. So let's go back to post 1, and now we need to actually get the data in down this way. In the next lesson, I'll show you a better way to do this, but for now, let's just reuse the code we've got. So I pull this down this way, and I uncomment it out. What we're going to do is go ahead and grab the actual entry based off whatever we get back. So this getStaticPaths method will return to us something called astro.params that we can pull something off of. And that would just be whatever's in the slug. So what I can do is come over here and let's just say const slug, and this will be equal to astro.params. Again, this will be whatever's passed down to me from here, which will be right here, right? So post 1, post 2, whatever it happens to be. So I'm going to grab this and pass it in this way. So we've got the actual get entry that will have the slug itself. If I hover over here, you're going to see that I've got a problem. I'm calling this slug. I actually need to destructure this, right? Because it's a thing passed down called slug. Then I'm going to pass this to my get entry, and then it knows that it should be one of those items, and it should check on this and show it down this way. So if I come over here, now this should work, and I should be able to just uncomment this stuff out like that, and now it shows back up. So I should be able to come now to post 2, post 3. In fact, let's just use our links, right? Post 4, oh, these are broken now. We'll look at that in a second too. So let's do that first so I can actually use them. So if I go over to index, notice that I just had them going to / whatever it happens to be. Now it's actually underneath a subdirectory. Now, instead of controlling that at the actual like content collection level, you're going to control it wherever you reference it, because that could be different, right? Relatively to where you're going to be. So what I'm going to do now is come inside here and we'll just surround this in backticks like this. So this can be dynamic, and then we'll say this should be at posts, whatever that happens to be. So now if I come over here, you should see it says / posts and then post 2. Come over here, that works just fine. Post 3, post 6, post 9, and all this is happening dynamically. That's the power of using this getStaticPaths method. It knows ahead of time everything it can be, and only these ones match. Anything else you pass in after post that isn't one of these slugs right here, it will fail on. So if I come over here and I add like pizza or post 10 or whatever, it'll just say, hey, I know this doesn't exist, because these are the only allowed paths that can come at this particular like dynamic route. Now, so far we've been in static site generation mode. It is possible to do something very much like this in SSR mode, and believe it or not, it's quite a bit easier. That's what we'll do in the next video. So far we've been in SSG mode. Now what I want to do is kind of reapply what we learned earlier about SSR. Now SSG mode is going to build all the pages to HTML files. SSR mode, however, can, on any given route, give the server the function to build the page live. Now you might remember we need to go ahead and add an adapter. I'm going to come over to my terminal, and there are a lot of adapters we can add. You can check out the Astro Docs for that, but I'm going to do npx astro add, and we'll just add the node adapter. Let's go ahead and add it, update our config, and get back up. and running. Okay, so now we are using SSR mode, except you might remember by default, it doesn't actually render every page as SSR. It just gives you the possibility for any page to be rendered as SSR. So right now, we've got the adapter in. If we wanted every page to use SSR, we could use output here and set this to server. For right now, I'm just going to comment this out because what I would usually do is just pick the individual routes I want to be server-side rendered, because a lot of the times you still have pages like landing pages or even blog posts that are not server-side rendered because they don't really change that often, maybe once a week or something like that, and maybe less frequently than that. So you could just rebuild at that time and they would be statically rendered, and that would technically be a little faster and better. So let's come over here though, and just to remind ourselves on any given route, if it's not server-side rendered across the entire site, we can use the pre-render here. We would set this, we do not want it to be pre-rendered. We want it to be rendered at build time or at access time. So I'm going to say false here. And now every page inside of our /posts and then all of our individual blog posts would not be pre-rendered. So as somebody hits this page, we now are going to grab that data fresh and then show it to them. So right here, you can see how we're using this get static paths function. We're not going to need that anymore because we're no longer going to be doing this live. Now, believe it or not, this is actually quite a bit easier than doing the whole get static paths method, although there are some limitations which we'll look at. So if I come over here, we come to page 1. Now it's going to be doing this live. Okay, so let's get rid of this right here. So now all we're going to do is pick off that slug. So let's just make this a little easier on ourselves and kind of go step by step. So I'm going to comment all this stuff out right here. And then let's come back up top here. And I simply want to grab the slug and console log it. Let's get rid of this as well. So if I hit post 1 and I jump over here, you see it says slug equals post 1. All right, so now what we want to do is pick off on the post. We say, hey, I want to look at just my posts and see if something matches this. Now here it's saying you can't pass in undefined. So one thing I would want to do is first of all, make sure I have a slug. So we're going to do another little check here. We'll say if there is no slug, then we're going to return, and we can return our 404 either using the new response down here, or there's actually a helper if you're in SSR mode called Astro.redirect, where we just redirect to like 404. Okay, so that will work as well. Now you do need to actually use return here because you're trying to kind of shortcut this route. There have been many times where I've used Astro.redirect or new response and I have forgotten to return it. So it just continues on down in the front matter, and it's frustrating because I can't figure out what's going on. So hopefully that little diatribe will help you as well. All right, so now that we've made sure that we have a string, we can pass that in down here to ensure that we actually get a post, which means I can come over here and I can go ahead and say if there is no post, do the same thing, except again, in server-side rendering mode, I can use Astro.redirect like this and redirect to the 404 page. That means if I come over here and I do something like 10, it should redirect to 404. And so, okay, cool. So let's come back over here then, and you'll notice that now this actually shows. So this is quite a bit easier in SSR mode to do dynamic routes like this. Again, there are a couple of limitations as well. So now we've seen how to do dynamic paths with both static site generation mode and also server-side rendered mode. The difference is with SSG mode, you have to tell Astro ahead of time, here are all the routes you should render. That way at build time, it can actually render those for you. In SSR mode, because it's dynamic, you simply have to handle anything that doesn't match with a redirect. Otherwise, it won't know what to do. Now, so far we've just been working with content collections. In the next video, I just want to shortly show you that you don't have to do content collections. You can actually do this with any data at all, and we'll use some API endpoints to do this. In this lesson, I'd like you to get some good practice in under your belt. Now, there's a couple things we need to talk about first before you can actually do what I'm going to ask you to do. And to do that, I need to actually move this back to server-side or to static site generation mode. So let's get rid of this up here. And all that should be good. This will be fine. And if I refresh, everything should work as expected. We'll get that slug down this way and then the post as well. Now, I'm actually going to remove all of this for a second because what I want to do is show how to get this post data in through these get static paths functions. So I'm going to come over here, and in addition to params, you can actually also pass down props. In other words, we can do this call right here up inside of here. Now, the cool thing is we've already actually done the call once, right? We've grabbed every collection, so we can actually just pass that directly down. I mentioned earlier that there's a better way to do it than like doing a second call down here, and this is the better way. I just don't want to confuse stuff to start with params and props and all those different things. So we're going to have the post, and this will simply be the post itself that we pass down. So I can do post like this, or in JavaScript, you can just do it like this. And now the post will actually be passed down. So all I need to do is instead of doing this, I'm just going to go ahead and destructure right here, post And this is going to come from astro.props, because now I should actually get a page. And when I get the page, I should get this post down this way. And now that should work just fine, right? So now I'm not actually doing a call anywhere. I'm just doing it up top once, passing in both the params, that's the name of the file, and also the props. Now you're going to need this for what we'll do next. So I just wanted to mention that. And the nice thing is we're kind of used to working with props like this. That's what we've been doing so far in components. So now we can do all the stuff in this getStaticPaths method, this function, and then just simply pass down both the params, which again is the name of the file, and then also the props. Okay, so let's get rid of everything I just showed you right there, because now what I want to do is talk about your challenge. All right, so what we're going to do is come over to the layout, and the base layout, I want you to go ahead and add one more item in this navigation bar. This will be a little bit messy just the way we have this set up, but let's say that this is going to go to Pokemon like this, and we'll just say Pokemon. So now we've got two items up here, and I want you to create another folder over here. We'll call this Pokemon. All right, now the reason we're doing this is because I want to use the Poke API to go ahead and grab 100 of these Pokemon. So if I grab this right here, you'll notice this is what I'm getting. I'm getting an object that has count, next, previous, results, and then an array of items. And what I want to do is now do remote data where we're pulling this in and building in dynamic routes. You don't have to use content collections for this. Just typically I find myself using content collections, but I want you to have the flexibility to do what you want. So what we need to do is grab this slug. So I'm going to go ahead and come over here, and you can name this actually whatever you want. You could call it Pokemon if you want to, but let's just call it slug. Whatever you name it though, remember you have to actually use that in the getStaticPaths function. So what I want to do is we're going to create some front matter up here. We're going to have our base layout like this, pull that in. And then let's have an H1 in here. And this will simply be the name of the Pokemon, which we don't yet have. And we'll also get a URL. So URL like this. And so we'll also use that as well. In fact, I'll go ahead and just make sure that this is like this URL, because this is what it should look like. We could be like learn more or something like that. Okay, cool. So these are the two things I want you to pull in. And you can see we've got name and URL. So that's why I'm using these two things here. Now, I want you to do this in two ways. First of all, I want you to try to use the getStaticPaths function. Remember, you can use the helper getStaticPaths like this to kind of start scaffolding this out. Inside here, you're going to do an asynchronous call to this endpoint, pull down that data, convert it to JSON, and then loop through that data, ensuring that you return params for each item in there. The param should probably be just the name here, so it should go to like /Pokemon /Bulbasaur. You also then want to do what I just showed you, which is to pass props as well, and the props can be the name and the URL. Then simply show these in the page. Once you're done with SSG mode, it'll be extra easy to do SSR mode because all you're going to do is pick off that slug from the actual Pokemon right here. Now, if you want to, you can even change the call. You can see if I just give it the name, it'll fetch all that data immediately for me. So you can do that as well if you want to. But go ahead and pause the video, try it those two ways, and then hit play. Okay, hopefully you had a good go of that. We're going to keep this real simple. I'm going to come over here with an async right here since we're going to be doing some asynchronous work. We'll have res, and this will be equals to await fetch. And we're simply going to fetch this endpoint right here. So let me grab this. And then we'll need some data off of this. So const data equals await res.json. All right, cool. Now we probably should type this just to kind of make it happy, and it's not very complicated. So let's have like type Pokemon. And this will have a name, which is a string, and a URL, which is also a string. And then our actual structure of the JSON we'll get back. We'll say like a type Pokemon res equals, here count will be a number, next will be a string, or I'm guessing null since previous is that way, and then previous will be this way, and finally results is just going to be Pokemon, an array of Pokemon. Okay, you don't have to do all this, but I figured I would just do it in case that typing kind of confuses you or you want to know how to do it. All right, cool. So now we're going to say, hey, this should be the shape of Pokemon res over this way. Now that I've got my data, I can return off of those. And for each item in the data, which is data.results, I'm going to return an item. So data.results, and now it even knows the typing, right? Then I simply want to map over this. And for each item, we'll just call it P for Pokemon. I want to implicitly return, so I'm going to wrap this in parentheses, some params. Now this needs to be named slug, since that's what we named our file up top here. And the slug is just going to be my p.name. Okay, cool. I also want to then pass down props. And the props would be, let's see, probably I'll just do name and do p.name. And then we could also do URL, but let's just spread it in, I guess, right? So let's just say the P like that. And I do need a comma there. Okay, cool. So I should now be able to come over here and we can grab the name and also the URL from astro.props. And then I can just uncomment these and everything should work as expected. So let's actually try it. If I come back over here, we're going to go to Pokemon and then / whatever it happens to be. So like Bulbasaur, did I spell that correctly? I don't know. Let's come back over here and just copy it because I'm sure I didn't. All right, there we go. So we actually are getting the name and we're also getting this little learn more button. Now we should probably make it to where we can actually hit this because that's obviously not working. So let's come over here. Let's see, this should be Pokemon like this. Okay, cool. In this route, then I probably want to just loop through all those too to make it easy on myself. So you didn't have to do this, but let's come over here with an index.astro. So at the route here, we're going to simply have a base layout like this. We're going to have a UL in here. And I'll give this a role of list because that's, I think, how I have my CSS set up. And I'm just going to come up top here and steal a lot of the stuff we did over here. Like this. Let's see, like this. And I guess let's export this. Now I'm making work out of this, but let's export this. That should work. And I can pull this in right here with Control and Spacebar. For each of these data points, which are at my results, I just want to map over them and grab for each Pokemon and output an LI. So we'll have an LI here. And inside the LI, I'll have an anchor that goes to p.name. And then I'll just do p.name inside here. All right, hopefully that makes sense what we were doing, but I just want to be able to show it over here so I can click on each of these individual items and it should take me to that item. This also means I need to wrap this and then we'll say /Pokemon / whatever the name happens to be. So if I come over here, I should be able to go to any of these and actually see the individual names. Okay, cool. So we actually got that working with SSG mode. It's okay if you didn't do this index page over here. Maybe I should have shown you how to do that in the intro, but hopefully you got this, which is the whole point. And again, you didn't have to do all this typing either. But now let's convert this to use SSR mode. Now, because we've got the SSR adapter enabled, I should be able to use the pre-render right here and just set this to false. Now what I want to do is not export static paths, but grab an individual item. Now I'll go ahead and kill that there. And if I come back over here, you'll notice that I can actually just hit an endpoint like this. So I'd hit the endpoint with whatever that dynamic nature happens to be. So actually, let's grab a lot of this like this, bring this down this way. And here I want to hit this endpoint and just have this section right here be the slug. Now this does need to be in a template literal string. And I do also need to make sure I have a slug. So if there is no slug, then I'll simply return. And remember to return there astro.redirect, and we'll just redirect to the 404 page. Now I actually need to get the slug as well. So const slug, this is from astro.params. And again, in SSR mode, you can just do this top level. It's going to pick off the name of the page or anything past Pokemon. So now it'll grab this data right here. It will then process it and pass it on down. Now, as you can see, this is a different structure than the other one I was working with. But eventually, I think, let's see, if I came back and I hit one of those former routes, those URLs, it should have brought me to this exact structure. So it looks like we've got, abilities, cries, forms. Is there anything that just gives me the thing's name? Let's check. Moves, species, looks like just name, top level name, that's fine. And yeah, so let's just use that. So I'm going to get rid of this right here. And now what I want to do is pick off the individual item here. I'm not going to type all this just to keep it simple. So now what we've got is our data. So I can grab my data.name, and that should return the same thing, I think. So if I come back over here, yeah, so it's going to return the name of whatever I passed in. Now I'm going to basically loop through each of these, and for any of these items, I should be able to get back the name. Now the learn more was just a URL to this structure right here. So there's more you could do. Obviously, you could do like an additional fetch and grab the image, which I'm sure is somewhere in here, and display that as well. You can see out in SSR mode, it's a little bit easier. All right, now I want to talk a little bit about building the two differences here before we move on to the next lesson. So if I come over here, this page right now is just server-side rendered. If I build then, you'll notice if I come over to my build files in dist, I've got underneath server, I've got pages, and underneath pages, I've got Pokemon, and here I've simply got the code I need to generate each of these individual items. So as I hit this, it will generate those items, which means it will do that live, which means if any of these endpoints change, or if the API is down, when somebody goes to that page, it will not exist. So you probably want to put some more checks in here as well, Like make sure you at least check to see if the response was okay and handle that more gracefully. Now, the thing is in dev mode, it looks the exact same. But if I come back over here and real quick, let's go ahead and back out of all this. All right, so back to static site generation mode. Now I rebuild it, npm run build. Notice it actually builds individual HTML pages for every single one of those characters. And if I come back over here and I look under not server, but client this time, Pokemon is going to have 100 subfolders with index under each of these. And notice this is just a static HTML page just like this. So that's the difference between the two, which means if any of these API endpoints update, again, this is already hard-coded, nothing will change on my site. So the question to ask when you're choosing on individual routes whether or not to have server-side rendering is, do I need this data to be dynamic? Or will it be so frequently updated that I need it to be dynamic for every single person? If it's something you can manually just run another build and produce your pages when something changes, then use SSG mode. That's typically better because it's a lot faster to just fetch a single HTML page. If, however, you say, hey, no, I really need this to be dynamic, that would be where you'd use server-side rendered mode. I hope that was a fun exercise for you and it started to build some confidence. Now, to make sure you can remember how to do both of these, I'm actually going to create a slug SSG and a slug SSR, and that way you can kind of look at both as we go forward if you need more like reference material. In the next video, what we want to do is look at nested dynamic routes. Before we started in earnest in this lesson, I wanted to talk about two things real briefly. One is I split off the SSG and the SSR mode, and I also split the types off. So if you want to check out those kind of separately, you'll find those linked down below. Now, this is underscore, which means the SSR one won't build by default. This one will. You can just swap that by swapping the underscores to see how that works. So if you wanted to check that out from the last lesson, you're welcome to do that. The other thing I wanted to mention is decoding params. Now, so far, our names of our params have been like Bulbasaur or like page 1 or something like that. Now, it may be that whatever your URLs are might have some items in it that need to be decoded. This is not something Get Static Paths does for you, so you need to go ahead and pass it decode URI if you ever need to do that. So just in case you run into that, I wanted to mention it. Now, this lesson is all about REST parameters. They give you a lot of flexibility because you can use this spread syntax to capture multiple nested routes, not just a single one. So you can see here we have a couple different options. If you use undefined, it'll actually use the default like index route. So this would be at sequences. If you use something like for, it will be sequences /for. And if you use something like 1, 2, and 3, it will capture all of those and build each of those. So it'll build this one, it'll build this one, and it will build the /sequences because of this undefined. So this is what's going to happen with this spread parameter. Now, if you're not sure kind of how these paths are worked out, you can see an example here. They also show an example with a route like this, where everything right here, see docs, public, all this kind of stuff would be the file name. This might be your branch, main, and repo would be Astro, etc. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense kind of how that's working out. Now, you typically would do this with something like pagination, but let me show you a wild example from the docs where they simply have one route that captures every single thing on their entire site. Now, notice with the undefined, they're going to get an index route at pages. With products, they'll get a products landing page that shows all their products. And with individual product items here, they can show data from that. Now, for me, that's a little wild because I typically like to have a little bit more visibility into where my pages are, but you may have a couple sections on your site where this would be really useful. We'll look at a couple of other examples, but just to show you kind of what this looks like, let's go ahead and create our own little products page. Now, I'm going to do this in two ways. We're going to do SSG and SSR mode. So I want to have little links in here that make this easier for us. So let's have an href here. We'll say like products SSG, and we'll say prod SSG, and let's copy this down and change both of these here to SSR. Okay, so now we should have both of those, yeah, just like that. So what I want is to first of all create one here along with anything else that might be underneath of it. So let's close this down, and under pages, since that's where all the routing happens, we'll have products SSG. We'll also have a products SSR in a second. Now I'm going to create a single nested section. We can call this page or slug. Let's just call it slug since that's what we've been doing. .astro, and that ... is important because now we can capture multiple items. So let's go ahead and come in here, and I'm going to have export static, get static paths. There we go. And we're going to simply have a little object or an array like they have over here. So let's go ahead and capture their basic structure here. We'll change it up just so it's very clear what's going on. First of all, we're going to have the home route, which will just be at /products SSG. So I'll say slug is equal to undefined. I don't want to import that from Astro Schema just like that undefined. The name here is just going to be products SSG. And then let's go ahead and add some HTML so we can do something else that we've looked at before. And here I'll just paste in a link to our eventual product page that we'll have here in a second. Now down below here, we're going to have that product page. So our slug is simply going to be product 1. Our name will be the same. So we'll say product 1. And for the HTML, let's have a paragraph tag that'll say something like, cool, product you simply couldn't understand. Okay, so now we've got all those items. We need to now loop over them and return them. So I'll take my pages.map. We're simply going to map over each of them. And I guess, you know what? Let's just grab this just to speed us up a little bit because the concept is the same. And we're going to totally mix this up by implicitly returning instead. And so now we've totally made it our own. Okay, now we don't have title or text. So let's grab this. This should be name. And for the text, we'll want this to be HTML. Okay, so now we've got all this coming in. These 2 pages are going to be built. The default like kind of home route, which should be right over here. And then we'll also have the product 1 route. Now it is rendering the page now, but we don't have anything on the page yet. So since we've passed props, we should be able to grab these from astro.props. And we've got name and HTML. So let's go ahead and output these down below. I'm going to grab my base layout. And here we'll have our H1 where we have our name. And then let's have our HTML. And let's just put this inside of a fragment. This is just to remind you that you can do this fragment like this with set HTML. And we're going to simply pass this the HTML like that. Okay, so now if I come over here and refresh, there you go. We've got products SSG. So it's actually matching this route right here since the slug is undefined. If I click inside here, you'll notice down below, it should say products SSG product 1, and that should take me here. So if I come over here, product 1, a cool product you simply couldn't understand. Okay, cool. So it's actually working for us in SSG mode. So this one route is handling both of those nested items. So let's do the same thing now, except let's do it in SSG mode. So if I come over here or SSR mode, so I'm going to come over here with products SSR, and let's go ahead and copy this over for now right here. And instead of being in SSG mode, I want to use the pre-render here, and we're going to set this thing to false. So now I'm using SSR instead. Okay, now before we get going too far, let's come over here. We're going to look at this SSR mode. Now in SSR mode, remember, none of the routes are built ahead of time. They'll simply be served whenever any route matches where somebody's gone. Now, as a little gotcha here, that means you could have multiple routes like this with multiple like locale.en, like here you see resource and ID, but you can't have multiple spread syntax because it can't match that properly. So you only get one spread syntax here in SSR mode per like route. Now that's a fairly edge use case, but if that doesn't make sense, feel free to ask in Discord and I could explain some more. Now what we want to do is come down this way and we can just extract the pages like they've done here and then simply pick off the individual slug and map over and find what we want. Now if a page doesn't exist, once again, because we're in SSR mode, we need to actually manually redirect to our 404 page. So let's go ahead and do that now. So I'm going to get rid of get static paths. Base layout is totally fine, but let's extract this out this way. I'm going to move this up top just because I like to keep those imports up top. And then what I want to do is go ahead and grab my slug like this off astro.params. And now I can grab whatever the page happens to be. Now we can call this whatever we want. They've called it page over here, and that makes sense to me. So let's say page. And we just want to loop over that array and pick off the individual item. So once again, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's just grab this right here. And all we're doing is using a simple find method to check to see if the slug matches something. If it doesn't, we need to redirect to 404. Now, instead of picking this off props, because we're no longer passing props down, we can just grab this off the page and everything should work as expected. So let's get rid of this. And I'm going to come back over here. We'll go to products SSR. And there you go. We got our products SSR showing, but I need to change this, right? So SSR like that. And then if I click inside here, this should take me to SSR product 1. And maybe we could say like SSR to make sure that's clear. And over here, I'll change this to say like SSG. Okay, so now we've got our product SSR. And again, this is being done dynamically when somebody hits this page route. Now, if you go to something that doesn't exist, we've manually thrown an error, so it takes you to the 404 page. All right, now let's come back over here, and I want to just talk about what we're going to do in the next lesson. We're going to, again, put this in practice so you get the chance to practice it. We're going to do it with our post route right here, because currently we don't have any index route here. So in other words, if I come over to home, there's no posts route. The home page is essentially acting as that. There's nothing at posts. So I'll leave it to you if you want to use SSG or SSR mode, but in the next lesson, I'm going to have you practice this nested dynamic routes by changing this to a ... slug and handling both of those use cases. Okay, we want to use this slug route right here and make it to where it covers not only the post like 1, post 2 through post 9, but also this route right here, which we don't currently have. Now, we could, of course, just make an index.astro. That's probably what I would do typically, and that way I kind of keep the nested routes away from this, but it is a good chance for us to practice what we've been looking at. So before we get started here, go ahead and come over to the navigation, and let's add one more over here. We're just going to change this to say posts, and this will act as like our landing page right here. So let's come over here, let's get rid of this, and we should be able to see that. Yeah, right here. We essentially want it to look just like this. Now, just like this, what we want to do is create it to where we can see that and also see all of these. So I'll let you go ahead and do this. I would encourage you to use SSR mode. That's going to be easier in this case. And it's just a quick example, and then we're going to go into some extra stuff about routing after this. Okay, so pause the video, do your best, and come right back. Okay, so we are in SSR already, so let's get rid of all the stuff that doesn't pertain to us. So like this right here doesn't matter anymore. And essentially what we want is to think about two scenarios. This should still work right here for all these routes, we see that, but there is a possibility of us not having slug. If it's undefined, that's actually when we want to render that posts route, right? So when there is no slug, we're going to do something. And when there is a slug, we're going to do something. So let's pick off the slug here. But in this case, what I want to do is we're just going to name this thing post. And then I'll just say if there is a slug, then we're going to go ahead and use await, get entry, post, all that. And if there's not a slug, we're going to await, get collection. And in that case, we'll get all of the posts. So that's as simple as it works, right? So if we're at this route right here and there is a slug, but it doesn't exist, we still do want to return a redirect. So like post 10 would not show anything, right? Because we don't have a post 10. So all I need to do now is come down this way and have two scenarios we think about. I'm going to wrap this in brackets and we'll do a little check here. One of these will be an array and the other one won't be, right? This is just going to be a single object. This will be an array of objects, but they both should have the same shape other than the fact that this is an array of this shape, right? So we can check off of it if it is an array or not. So here we could say if array dot is array, and there's a bunch of different ways you could do this. So you don't have to have done it this way, but if the, what do we call it, post? Yeah, if that's not the case, then we're just going to return what we currently have. Now you might want to come over here and make this a little bit more obvious. So let's make some parentheses here. We'll drop this in here. So that's the one scenario. So if I come over here, that should still work. Now there's another scenario, and that would be if it is an array. So let's go ahead and copy this down this way. We're going to say if array.isArray, if that post is an array, so if it's this collection right here, then what we want to do is use the same structure we have on the index route. So I'll come back over here, and we should be able to just grab all of this, I think, jump over this way and drop it in right here. Now we'll have to change around a couple things because this is called post and not posts. Other than that, though, this should look the exact same. Now, if we did that correctly, I should be able to come over to my posts and actually see this here. Now I'm not seeing it, and there's a reason why. Did you see what I did not do? I meant to actually make this a nested route, but I didn't, so it's only handling the slug. But now if I come over here, this should work right here. Okay, so hopefully you didn't have that problem like I did, but now we're handling both the index route and we're handling the individual routes like page 1, page 2, all those things. And we're doing it here with SSR because it's quite easy to just pick off the slug and see if there is a slug, in which case we actually grab the entry. And if there's not a slug, then we're just going to render the index route. Now again, if it is a slug, it should expect a post. So this will always return correctly, but if there is a slug and I don't have an entry, it should still 404. So if I come over here and we go like post 10, this should 404, right? And I guess for all these, I probably need to make it like this. So hopefully you haven't been screaming at yourself for the last couple lessons because I haven't done that. So now if I come over here, it should 404 kind of at the index route. Okay, so that's all there is to this. And now we've handled both the index and we've also handled the slug route. Now this is a very simple page. Obviously, you'd probably have more complexity here, and that's why I typically just have an index route that handles all of this use case, and then I simply have a slug without the ... so not that rest parameter, instead just slug, and then I handle all the post 1, post 2 from that angle. Now there's another scenario that people typically use, and that is they might have like a grouping of posts. So if I come over here with 9 posts, it's not a big deal, but if you have 100 or 200 or 300 posts, you may not want to show them all on that single page. You might want to have like posts 1 like this, right? And then post 2, and it might show like groups of 6 or 7 at a time. Well, in SSG mode, we actually have a really great option for that. It's called paginate, and it's a function that Astro gives us. That's what we'll look at in the next video. Astro includes built-in support for pagination, and you can do this in SSG mode. Now, instead of using one of our existing collections or like fetches, we're going to just go ahead and add another one, all right? We've already got like 50,000 here, so let's just do one more. We're going to call this contacts. So add this to your base layout. If I come back over here, you'll see now we should have contacts right here. Okay, so there's nothing here yet. What we want to do is be able to show different numbers of contacts per section. So we could have like contacts /1, which might show like our first 4 or 5, /2, which would show our next 4 or 5, etc. So we'd have little pagination. Now this happens, again, using this paginate function. So again, this is static paths. We're going to have this page prop. It does actually need to be named page because that's what it expects. And so we'll name it page, and then we'll pass it an array of items, and then simply use the paginate function to return, which we can grab from getStaticPaths, where we pass in our data, and then use this page size parameter. Now there are a couple of ways to work with this. You'll see that if I come down here, it expects either the page like this or the spread page. Now basically the difference is if you use the spread page, it will both use an index route. So like you see right here, it's going to have a /post. That will be your first grouping, and then /2 would be your next one, right? And then 3 and 4. Otherwise, if you use this one, you don't have an actual index route at posts. It starts at post /1. So I typically prefer this spread syntax. So that's what we're going to do. So let's come back over here. I'm going to create a contacts like this. And then inside here, we're going to do page.astro. So let's go ahead and get something up over here. And if we follow the kind of the thing we've got here, we're going to do something very similar to this using JSON placeholder. So I'm going to grab this users here, and maybe these will be our contacts, right? And I think there's like maybe 10 of them. I don't remember. Yeah, looks like there's 10. So we can group this a couple different ways. We'll probably just pick off like the name and the email address or something like that. But up top here, first of all, we need to go ahead and use the getStaticPaths method, which I can pull in right here. And we're just going to do const res equals await. This will be fetch, and we just want to fetch this endpoint. So let me go ahead and grab it right here, and we'll drop it in, which means this needs to be an asynchronous call, so that way we can await down here. Now we're going to grab the data here from res.json, which we also need to await. And then remember, we get this paginate helper, paginate like this, and we return that. And the first thing it takes is the data, which we conveniently named data. And the second thing is it takes this right here where we can pass in something called page size and say how many we want to be included in each page. So let's do something like 4. Now just below here, we then get something called a page. And again, this is what it happens to name it. So you do have to name it that exact same thing in this spread parameter or simply a standard parameter in brackets. We'll say this is from astro.props. Okay, so if we did that correctly, I should be able to console log this. We'll jump back over this way. We now should get something at contacts. It's a blank screen, but if I come over here, here are all of our contacts. So notice it gives us this structure where we've got the data. And since we said we only wanted 4, it only gives us the first 4. And then we get these other items. Start, which is the start number of pages. End, which is the total number of pages. The size, which is how many we have. The total number we're looping over, in this case 10. The current page we're on, the last page available, and then the URL as well. So this URL will give us links to the next and previous. Now, if you want to know more about this structure, you can actually find it in the docs as well, down this way. So the data will be whatever data we pass in and everything else we just saw. So we can actually take this and use like a little navigation system, right? Where we can say first, last, all that kind of stuff. So let me show the typing here so that we can kind of see what's going on. And then let's close down the sidebar and let's pull in my base layout. That should give me my navigation and everything else I might want. We'll have an H1 here where we'll say like contacts, and then in parentheses, we could say page, whatever it happens to be. Now you might remember we have this current page prop, so we can say page.current page. This will be page 1, page 2, whatever it happens to be. So if I come back over here and refresh, we see contacts page 1. So let's create a little list, and I'll set a role of list on this just to help my styling, because I think that's how I've got it set up if I remember correctly. And then we're going to loop over the page. Remember, we get data off that. Again, the structure, if you're concerned, kind of being able to track this, we're just picking off whatever we've passed in, and this is the typing for that. So for each of these items, we're going to map over them, and we can call them C for contact. And I should have C.name, I think was the structure of that. Over here, C.name, yeah, so let's check. There we go, we get these 4 people showing up. Now, all of this data is unknown, so it's not exactly sure what to do, but I could come over here if I wanted to and grab this. We can go ahead and type this if we want. So I'll call this a contact, and I'll simply drop all this in here. Now, this first one is going to be a type of number. And to make this real easy, I'll grab that first one right there because all the rest of these are going to be strings. Okay, so now we've got this type of contact. We can say that this will be a type of contact here, which gets rid of our errors down this way. All right, so if you're concerned about the typing, now we can actually come in here and just pick off anything we want, like the email, and I don't have to look up what the type looks like because I've got it up top here. Now you'll remember we actually get this little help down here where we can see if there are previous or next links. We can even look at the very first one or the last one and jump to those pages. So below all of this, I'm going to have a back button and a forward button. So for the back button, I just want to make sure that there is a previous. So I could pick this off of the page.url.prev, right? So if this does exist, I want to have an anchor here. So we should be able to just pass it page.url.prev and close this off and say like previous. And then I'm going to go ahead and copy this down because we also want to look to see if there's a next. So I'll change both of those together and then change this as well. Again, where am I getting the names for all this stuff? Well, you get to see it right over here when we console logged this, but you can also actually see it in the typing. You'll notice that when I started to type this out, .url. And it tells me what all the items are, in this case, prev. So notice I've got a next. If I come over here, I now have previous and next, albeit they're kind of stuck together. And finally, if I get to the last page, I only have a previous and I can go backwards. So notice it's actually changing everything else for me automatically, and I can change how many I want. So let's say I just want 2. That should give me 5 total pages, right? Next, next, and then finally when I get to the final one, it goes like that. Now again, because I'm using the spread syntax, my first page won't be /1, it'll just be at the route, the contacts, right? The next one will be at number 2, 3, and 4, etc. This paginate function can be really handy for breaking down a huge blog into kind of sub-nested directories. We have a few more items to go over. One of those is redirects, which we've looked at a little bit so far, but there's more to it, and then also rewrites. Now with the redirect, we've used both Astro.redirect. If I hover over here, you'll see it's SSR only, and that's because it has to do this dynamically using this Astro namespace, which is not available once you render your page to HTML. We've also shown how to obviously use just the new response like this, which is something that obviously is included in browsers, where you can then redirect to like a 404 page. You might remember we just did like null, and then passed along a status of 404, and the browser can handle all that and redirect to your 404 page. So we've looked at these kinds of dynamic redirects, either truly dynamic with SSR, or just making sure that anything that doesn't match some schema, or just making sure that anything that doesn't match a route on our site redirects to our 404 using that new response. But there is actually another way to redirect, and that is to use configured redirects. Now, sometimes you have to redirect users permanently to pages. So like if you're moving to a different blog or you change your blog structure and you don't want to lose all of that, goodwill built up on Google or Bing or wherever, you can redirect people using this export. Now, obviously, depending on your build location, sometimes they also have ways to redirect, but Astro includes a way to do this directly in the config. So as you can see, this is in an astro.config.mjs file, and you can simply define a redirects object where you have the old page and a new page. Now there is a really nice fallback here where if you happen to then create an old page.astro or whatever, it will use this over your redirect. So there's some safety built in as well, which is really helpful. And as you can see down this way, you can even use these dynamic route redirects as well, and it will figure all that out for you. Now, if you have an SSR adapter installed, even if it's not being used on every single page, you can also pass along a status, which can sometimes be really helpful. So let's play with this just a little bit. If I come over here to Astro config, you'll see that we can just add a redirects like this. As you can see, we've still got that node adapter installed. Now let's keep this the most simple. I can take my about route, which needs to be like this, and let's redirect to, just the home page. Okay, so we don't actually have an about. So if I come over here and I try to go to about like this, it shouldn't throw a 404, it should just redirect me to the home page, and it does. Again, I have an adapter installed, that node adapter. So in addition to that, I could also pass on a status if I wanted to. So instead of it being a string here, I could just make that the key, and for the object, I'd have a status, as long as I don't double colon there, and we could have something like 302. And then for the destination, you'd have the home route. By default, this would use a 301 redirect, which means it's been permanently moved to the new location. A 302 redirect means it's been temporarily moved and may change back. So Anyhow, depending on your status, you may want to update this, and you can do this with SSR mode. Okay, so that's everything you really need to know about redirects. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about rewrites. So if I come down this way, you'll see that with rewrites, it allows you to serve a different route without redirecting the browser to a different page. So this isn't so much for like things that have changed routes. For those, you should use a redirect. It's more for like stuff like this, where if you have products shoes men or products men's shoes, and either one you just want to redirect to the right place without having to maintain both sections, then you can go ahead and do this. It can also be useful for SEO, so you can display content that would otherwise require you to return a 404 status, or for localized content. So sometimes you'll take different localized content and kind of show the same content no matter what, based on their locale, and you can use this kind of rewrite instead of throwing a 404. So here they have an example for Cuban Spanish, where if somebody navigates to this, you can just show them the normal Spanish route, but keep them on their page. So you're not actually redirecting them. You're just kind of inserting the content from another page into the page that they're on, because you may not have Cuban support, but you still have a Spanish article on that topic. Now there's some more complex stuff we have yet to look at when it comes to like API routes. We'll look at that in the future, but you can also use a rewrite there. And they give a couple other examples as well with middleware, which is another thing we have yet to talk about, but there's another module on that coming up. So let's go ahead and comment out this redirects here. And then let's come under pages and let's see, let's just go to like the index route right here. And let's return astro.rewrite. And here let's rewrite to like products SSR. So notice as soon as I save it here, I'm still on the home route, but it's actually redirected me to this products page. There are some more advanced cases around API routes where you might want to include headers or things like that. I'll leave you to check out the docs for those kinds of more complex examples, especially because we haven't talked about those yet. In the next lesson, I very briefly want to go over a few extra items we have yet to cover, but that are related to routing, and then we'll do some practice at the end. There are a couple of other items we have yet to cover, or we've covered just very briefly. So I want to go over those in this video. First of all, there's this underscore if you want to exclude pages. So I could come over to my index route and just exclude this page, and suddenly it's gone to 404. So that's one way to exclude pages being built. If you are dynamically rendering pages, so that could be content collections like we've got here with our posts, where we grab a content collection entry or a whole collection of entries. Or if you're doing this dynamically using some kind of API endpoint, you could obviously exclude there as well. So for this paginate one, you would just strip out any data that didn't meet your criteria. Here for the get collection, you could use that filter off the back side of this. So you grab like the data and say like if data.date or pub date is above or less than this, or is set to draft or whatever, and you could exclude those as well. Obviously, in this case, we're using this for both the index route and the individual pages. So for the individual pages, you'd also have to do a check to make sure that they're not actually built, even if we don't actually list them here. So those are a couple of ways to exclude pages being built. Okay, so next thing I want to cover is route priority order. Not super like top of mind, but you can see here how this, or this could all render create. Now, why is that? Well, because this is at the base of the entire site. So that means it can capture anything, any slug after the / of your site. That includes posts/create because it's a REST parameter. Now, obviously, you've got a post folder as well, and here you could just have a create route, create.astro, or this could be dynamic, and you could be passing in create here, or you could have some other dynamic route and pass in create. It's a TypeScript file in this case, but that would still work as like an API route, essentially, which we haven't looked at yet. But then you also could have a spread one, which could capture both the index route with an undefined slug, you might remember that, or something else past that. So Astro needs to know which order it should use. Basically, there are a couple things we need to pay attention to. Reserved routes, which we'll look at in a second, and then it basically takes the more defined or precise routes. So in this case, everything under the posts right here would take precedent over this. So this is only ever going to get hit if all of these fail for whatever you pass in. Now, static routes, in other words, just straight up like create.astro, will also take precedence. So in this case, this one would be built. These would be ignored if you pass in create for each of those. Next, these dynamic routes using named parameters would take precedence over the REST parameters. So these two are right here. These would be built next after create if this one doesn't match for whatever reason. Now notice then too, pre-rendered dynamic routes take precedence over server dynamic routes. So if one happens to be SSG, the other one happens to be SSR, those SSG ones are going to take precedence. Endpoints like API endpoints, this is what this .ts file is. We haven't looked at those yet. they will take precedence over pages, and then file-based routes take precedence over redirects. So essentially, like I said, it's precision over like a general thing. So this is the most precise, this is the next most precise, then this one, then finally here, and then lastly here. And that's exactly what they're going to talk through down this way. Now, I mentioned reserved routes. That's the next thing I want to go over. There are a few routes that are internal to Astro and you can't take them as your own. So you cannot have like an underscore Astro /, and they start all these with underscores, so you wouldn't be tempted to do this anyhow. If you tried, this would just give you a 404, but these are reserved routes and they will take precedence over anything that you have as well. All right, last thing I wanted to touch on very briefly is the concept of middleware. This allows you to intercept requests and responses and inject your own behaviors dynamically. Now, we have a whole module coming up on this. I just wanted to mention it because it's part of routing, but we're not going to talk about it right now, but it is part of that whole flow. So I wanted you to know that it's coming up, especially if it's something that you know about already and you're interested in doing more with. When I was editing, I forgot I wanted to cover one more thing, and that is page partials. Now, they're intended to be used with a library like HTMX or Unpoly. Essentially, what they do is they remove Astro's behavior of wrapping your routes with HTML. So they can kind of be standalone segments, and you can use them with one of these libraries. Again, we're not going to get into this in this course, but if you're interested more in it and you're used to using a library like that, I'll encourage you to look at the page partials documentation, which I'll try to remember to link below. Now, we've talked about a lot in this module, and there could be ways in which this is confusing. So I wanted to kind of go back to the basics and just slowly walk through both rendering and routing, and that way you can gain some confidence that you can do the basics, which is what you're going to need for the next module, where we're going to build out our own portfolio site. It's everyone's favorite time, practice time. Well, maybe not, but hopefully it will help you. I will mention you need to download the starter code below so you can follow along with me. It's essentially a stripped down version of what we've been doing, back kind of to the basics of the start of this module. Now, what I'd encourage you to do is make liberal use of the docs and then just go one at a time. So pause the video, try it yourself, and then play the video. If you get stuck at any time, please check out the docs. There's no awards for not looking at docs. It'll help you learn it better than you can learn from me, because they're going to be constantly updating this and hopefully explaining it in a way that helps you as well. So the combined knowledge of what I have and what the docs have should help you out. Okay, so let's go ahead and start in. Pause the video, try it yourself, and then play, and just do one by one with me. Okay, first of all, we're going to redirect me right here to go to the home route instead. So I can just use a rewrite over here. So I'll do return astro.rewrite, and we'll rewrite to the home page. So now it says welcome home, but notice it still is at the me route, which is what we want. Okay, so back over here, we did this one. Next, use a global config to redirect me to here. So now we're going to redirect entirely. So if I come over here to my Astro config, inside here, we're going to use a redirects. And you might remember that this is an object, and you can have key value pairs. These can either be things like this, right, where it's just a string and a string, or you can have an object in SSR mode, which we don't have yet enabled on this project. So now if I come here and I go to me, it should redirect me to home rather than showing me that. And it does take precedence over this, so this won't be used. It'll actually hit the route and redirect me automatically with a 301. So even if I try to go to me, it'll just take me straight here. All right, back to the README. Here we want to make sure that we prevent me from being built altogether, which we can do with an underscore like that. Okay, so hopefully you did okay with those three. Me is gone now. Okay, next, let's come back to the README. We want to add a post page that shows a link to all posts in your posts content collection. So to do that, I need to come over here and create a new folder we're going to call posts. And I'm just going to keep this at index. Let's actually just copy this one over to make it slightly easier on us. We'll go up a level. And then I want to loop through all my content collections, which means I need to await those up here. So we'll call these posts. This is from await get collection, and I'm going to get all my posts. Now all I have to do is come down here. We'll say like read my blog, and I'll have a UL here. And because of the CSS, I'm going to add a role of list on here to style it the way I want. And then I'm going to grab my posts.map, and for each post, which I'll just call P, I want to output an LI, and this one is going to have an anchor link that points to the individual, let's see, p.data.slug. Then we'll close that off and put the p.data.title, right? Okay, so that should show all of those. Now if I come over to posts, there they go. All the posts are showing up. Now I'm going to go ahead and order these as well like we've been doing. So I'll say sort, and we'll go grab the first and the second, well, each iteration, and basically take the a.data b.data.title. We'll use local compare and pass in b.data.title. This will just sort them 1 through 9, so that way they're kind of in order as I would expect. Usually you'd probably do this by their published date or something like that, but in our case, they're titled, so we're going to do it that way. Okay, next README item here, create a dynamic route for all posts under the post directory using SSG mode. Well, we know how to do that. I'm going to come over here and use this slug like this, .astro. The bracketed syntax allows me to do that. And then let's actually capture this as well, just to, again, make it a little easier on us. Like that, we'll go up a level like we did before. And what I need to do is have a get static paths helper come in here, where I first loop through all my actual posts. So where was that one I just created? Get rid of here. Here we go. So I'm going to grab this right here and drop this over here. We'll go ahead and await this and pull and get collection, which means this needs to be async, if I can spell. Okay, so we've got all the posts now. We need to map over these and return them down this way. Now remember, I have to return params slug for each of these. And this might be something you need to look up. That's totally fine. I often do as well. It's just that I just taught through this, so that helps me hopefully remember it, but I guess we'll see, won't we? All right, so I'm going to take my post.map. For each post, I simply want to return here, and I'm going to implicitly return this params like this, where we have a slug that equals to p.data.slug. And then I'm going to actually just go ahead and pass down props as well. And this will just be, I don't know, we'll just call this like page, or what did I call it? Post? Yeah, so we'll say post, and this will just be p. Okay, so I should be able to grab these down this way. Const props equals astro.props. And this is not called props, it's called post. And now I should be able to come down here and add the post title. So I didn't necessarily say you had to do this, but that's what we're going to do right now. So I'll just grab the post.data.title like that and show that there. So hopefully we did this correctly. I should come to post 1, and I realized I didn't actually add this correctly down this way. So I need to wrap this. Hopefully you got that right, even though I didn't. And make sure that I go to posts /post / whatever happens to be. So posts / that. And now that should work for me. So if I come back here, I should be able to go to like post 4 and it shows up. Let's come over here. We've got post 4 too. Now we can go ahead and output the content as well. That's not something you had to do, but I'll go ahead and do that here. This comes from, what is it, render? Yeah, from Astro content. We're going to render the entire post. And this needs to be awaited as well. And now I can just output that Astro component down here, content. And there we go. There's all my content. Now we could, of course, grab the image as well. While we're at it, let's go ahead and do that. Post.data. Let's see, cover.src. And we can do the alt, which would be post.data.cover.alt. And while we're at it, we might as well add the height, because we can grab that from the actual image as well. So post.data.cover.height. And while we're doing height, let's do width and call it a day. Okay, so one more. We're going to change both of these to width. Okay, so now that image should come in as well. So now I've got the image and it's reserving the right space it needs based on these characteristics right here. Okay, so we did above and beyond on that one, but we did this and we now did this. Now we want a paginated posts route with 2 posts per page and previous next buttons showing when they're available. Okay, so for this one, we actually need to get rid of something we just did. So let me open the sidebar over here. And this one right here, this is where we want to do this. So I'm going to go ahead and just like comment this one out. And I guess let's duplicate this as well. So I'll just copy and paste. And this we want to be a nested slug like this. Well, it doesn't have to be, but that's typically how I like to do it. So that the home route is just posts and it shows like whatever, 2 or 3 posts. What are we supposed to do? 2 posts per page and previous next buttons. So for this, we're going to use the paginate function. We're still in SSG mode, so that should help us out. And I come right over here, and it's right here where I want to do that. So we can actually grab a lot of the stuff from here to make this a little easier on ourselves. And I'll come back over to the slug area. We're going to get rid of this. Make sure we pull and get static paths from Astro. And then down this way, we're going to read our blog and do all the stuff we need to do. So I'll comment that out, come back up top here. We're going to take in paginate here, paginate. And we don't have to worry about all this. All we have to do is pass in our paginate. The first item is the things we're looping over. The second is an option where we pass in page size. And I should have mentioned you can pass in params and props here as well. That can be helpful for more complex structures. Maybe we could pass in props for each of these, but let's just keep it as simple as we had it before. So page size here would be 2, I think is what we said. So now if we come back over to posts, this should render, but it's not. And you may have noticed already, I used slug here. This is one of the times where you do have to use page. You can't use slug or anything else because it's expecting page, just because that's how Paginate works. Okay, so now it should say read my blog, and I could say like page, and then whatever the page happens to be. Now you might remember I actually get this as page here from astro.props. And so I should be able to pick off the page dot, what was it, current page? Yeah, page 1, page 2, whatever. All right, so we can do the same thing here. We kind of did before, except in this case, I'm going to take my page dot, what do we want? Data, and then sort through those and just show the different titles. Now below here, we're going to have a forward and backwards button, right? So remember we did a little check off the page. So page dot, let's see, URL dot prev. So if this thing exists right here, then I want to show a link that goes backwards. So here we'll have an anchor link, and the href will point to whatever the previous page happens to be, and we'll say like prev. Okay, so it doesn't exist yet because there's no previous page past like before number 1. But I can change these all to next, and that should work. So now I've got a next and a previous, and we can go back and forth all the way through the different posts that we have. Okay, so I think we did that with a couple little hiccups. So that was right here. That means we've only got a couple left. One is to enable SSR and pre-render the home page only. So I'm going to come over here and we'll do mpx astro add node. Perfect. And yes, and yes. That means if we're pre-rendering only the home page, everything else should use SSR. Now this will involve a little bit of complexity because we're going to have to change some of these things over here. So I'll go to astro.config, and inside here, I'm going to have an output. We're going to change this to server so that everything will be rendered by the server. Now, right now it's yelling at me. That's okay. Let's come back to a page that will actually work, like the home route over here. And remember, this is the only page we actually want to pre-render. So I can use the pre-render method right here, and we're going to make sure that this is pre-rendered to true. So this one should be statically built. Everything else should not be. I probably should have thought about the order of this a little bit more because like this is not going to work anymore because we're using get static paths here, and we're using the paginate function, which is only for SSG. Same thing over this way. These are using get static paths as well. So if you got stuck with that, please don't worry about it. I just want to make sure you understand how to use the server and pre-render too. So you can just leave these alone. They won't build. The site would crash if you tried this, but we're getting our practice in, which is the important part. Now I want to enable SSR, but pre-render every page. So make them all static except for the home page. And this one should actually work. So if I come back over to the config right here, I'm going to remove this, which means now everything will be statically rendered. And then I want to make sure that I set this to false. So only the home page will not be statically rendered. So if I come back to posts, this will be statically rendered. So it should all work again. Each of these posts should work as well, but the home page is actually dynamically rendered. How do we prove that? Well, if I come over here and npm run build it, and then I look at the output directory right here, you'll see that the client, this is the things that are pre-built ahead of time. It includes all of my posts, right? These are all statically rendered, and the server should contain my index page. And if I come over here, there's my index right here. So it's the code to build the index page, and that's what I want it to do. All right, hopefully you didn't have too many hiccups, and doing this one kind of at the end didn't throw you off with killing every other route. But even if that took you a long time, I hope it was helpful to kind of reinforce what you've been doing. In the next module, we get to do something really exciting, and that is we're going to build out an entire site using everything we've learned so far so that you can have a portfolio site in Astro.